Are we ready?
I believe so. Meeting is recording.
Yeah, I just heard the recording go on, so, yeah. Okay, so Laura, pardon me. So used to Laura doing this for the CSD. So Dan, you want to take the roll call, please? Well, I'll call the meeting to order, and Dan, you want to take the roll call, please?
Yes, I will do that. Director Cody.
Here.
Director Ballantyne.
Here.
Director Zimmer.
Here.
Chair Ohilsky.
Present.
All right, all four parties are present.
Okay, so first thing we have is item 3, which is the ongoing resolution authorizing continued remote teleconferencing meetings. As we've discussed multiple times, it has to be done every month. So does anybody have any comments on this? Okay, seeing none, let's go to public comment, please, Laura.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. There's no public comment at this time.
Okay, could I have
Oh,
a
I'm
motion?
so sorry, Marshall. Somebody just raised their hand.
Okay,
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. And just so we're clear, this is public comment on things not on the agenda right now?
no, this is on the
for
resolution.
the resolution
Oh.
authorizing remote teleconference meetings.
Yes. All right. Excellent. That also. I just want to thank everybody for what they have done so far up to this point. Doing it this way seems to be so much easier on so many people, either people that are aged or people that are concerned about their health. This might be something you might want to consider doing all the time. You don't have a diocese like the supervisors do that's real expensive that you need to go sit in the big fancy chairs. This is more comfortable, I think, for everybody. So I just thank you for doing what you're doing with this, and I hope you continue it. That's all. Thank you.
All right, Tom, you just have to unmute yourself. Sorry, Tom, it's giving me some issue. I apologize.
Oh.
I'll come back to you in just 1 second.
Why don't you go to Lindy then?
Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Laura. Good afternoon, everybody. I agree. I think the telecommuting and I guess doing it with this Zoom is a great way to do it. I kind of like the other method of Zoom where you can see each person that's on the panel. We do that with our LOCAC meetings. But what I wanted to say is if this is saving quite a bit of money from the annual regular recorded meetings and the rental of the space, well, I don't know if we have to pay rent to rent at the CSD office, but I would like to again bring up doing forgot the word, translation, not translations, but transferring all of the meeting minutes into a legible hard copy, because I think sitting and watching a meeting for an hour and a half to 2 hours is just not going to happen. And if you want the community to be brought along and informed, then we need transcriptions. Thank you. Took me a minute. So consider that if we're saving money by doing this remotely, which I think is a good idea and works, that we would also consider looking at what it would cost to do the again, can't remember it. Thank you.
And then Tom actually sent in his comment via the question and answer. He said he's having mic issues and just wanted to say that he is in support of teleconferencing. There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, can I have a motion to accept this, please?
Marshall, I'll make a motion to accept authorizing continued remote teleconferencing. Also just like to add, you know, the reason for the remote teleconferencing is because of the current COVID conditions, and I don't believe we can continue based on convenience or financial reasons, but I guess we'll cross that bridge when we get there.
Okay, do I have
Seconds.
Second. Yeah, Mark, I was going to say the same thing you were. This is because of the governor's order, but if that order wasn't there, we couldn't do the remote conferencing. So we'll just have to see how this plays out as COVID develops.
Sure, yeah.
Okay, do you want Daniel, if you want to take a vote, please?
Yes. Director Cody,
Yes.
Director Ballantyne,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes,
Chair Hilsky.
Yes.
All right, motion passes.
Okay. Next thing we have is item number 4, which is board member comments. Board members may make brief comments, provide project status updates, or communicate with each other, or pardon me, with other directors, staff, or the public regarding non-agenda items. The key is non-agenda items. Anybody have any comments they'd like to make at this point?
yes, Marshall, this is Mark. One quick update from Golden State Water. The appointment of a new alternate director for Golden State Water is Matt Cook. Matt Cook recently joined Golden State as the operations superintendent for Los Osos. And so I want to just acknowledge him as the alternate director and let the community know that Matt is now representing Golden State for Los Osos service area.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.
Any others?
Yeah, and so this is Kate from the county here. I'm not sure if he's actually on the meeting, but I know Blaine Reilly, the county's new director of the groundwater sustainability department, is possibly here and might be able to hop on and say a few words.
Yeah, he is,
okay.
Kate, he is here.
Okay, great. Yeah, so I'll turn it over to him, but he will be taking over my role as alternate director for this committee, probably in either February or March of next year. So I'll let Blaine go ahead and introduce himself.
Thank you, Kate. Yeah, my name is Blaine Reilly, Director of Groundwater Sustainability. And yeah, it's just a pleasure to be participating with you all today. And I look forward to getting to know you and working with you over the next coming months. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, it looks like that's it. So can we move on to special presentations, which we have none of? Consent agenda. There's 3 items on here. The my computer, the 2021 budget update and invoice register. Second is the approval of the minutes from the November 17th, 2021 meeting. And third is approval of the minutes from the October 27th, 2021 meeting. Does anybody want to pull an item here?
Yes, S&T would like to pull the 2 meeting minutes, B and C.
Okay. So then we're just dealing with the budget update and invoice register. Does anybody have any comments on that before we go to public comment? Okay, Laura, let's go to public comment on 6A.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yep.
Yes.
Thank you. Budget issues. The Los Osos Sustainability Group feels that the budget statement is too general. It would be helpful if it were itemized in a little more detail so we all know what has been accomplished, and that my following questions would most likely have already been answered. So Dan, first, could you explain where the 15,000 for technical support adaptive management services was spent? Who received it? And if it was Cleith Harris Group received it, why didn't the 15,000 cover the 13,240 in contingency funding that they did receive for help with the sustainable yield? And budgeting is never an easy thing to do, but the sustainability group feels that the expenditures are unnecessarily high. such as the $330 for running the transit model a few times and writing a report, or the $150,000 to develop the model revision, and $100,000 to run it a few times to estimate the benefits of a few programs, or the $30,000 for a report that grant to that grant agency, and $20,000 is too much for managing the project. In fact, isn't the management of the project covered under the Project Management Task 3.2 of Dan's regular scope of work? When we're done spending all this money in 2 years or so, we'll still have seawater intrusion, and we still won't be able to accurately map or assess basin conditions. You'll even have major uncertainties in modeling predictions still, because you'll have spent scarce money on modeling rather than on private well monitoring, putting basin-wide conservation and other programs in place, and on the monitoring wells needed to accurately map basin structure and conditions. In the past 6 years, Golden State and LOSCD drilled 3 wells. 2 of them, the Lupin observation well and the middle school test well, resulted in significant changes in the understanding of the basin. This highlights the need for more monitoring wells, not more modeling. A model is only as good as the data that goes into it. Again, where does the money budgeted for the technical support adaptive management service go? If it's intended for Cleith Harris Group, why doesn't that cover the technical services he added to his scope of work in 2021 annual monitoring report? And there is no scope of work provided for the lower aquifer well improvements. Exactly what improvements are you funding with the $25,000, and who does it? Where does it go? Lower aquifer well improvements are supposed to be included in new monitoring wells. $25,000 is not enough even for 1 well. And Cleith Harris Group is proposing it is in the scope of work for the 2021 annual report due out next June that a preview of the 2023 sustainable yield is provided. This shouldn't happen.
Patrick, you've reached your 3 minutes.
I have 2 sentences left I'd like to say. That it would be.
Chairperson Olszewski?
No, time is up. I'm sorry.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi again. I had a number of questions also. What in the second breakdown of expenses, what is CHG? There is no way to know that. So I look at AGP, WSC. What is CHG? Is that just general operating expenses? Well, okay, I'll continue with my questions and hurry because I'll get cut off too. Anyway, I just see a lot of what Patrick discussed. I don't see quite where monies match up, especially between attachment 1 and attachment 2. The numbers, again, a question about, I think there's a contingency add-on, and I'm not sure if we're not needing, the contingency is normally for overrun costs, and it got added into the budget at $314,100. Just curious about that. I was looking at costs. I think it's for, excuse me, I'm just trying to get back onto this. Oh, for semi-annual seawater intrusion monitoring, you have $6,839. Semi-annual means twice a year from my understanding, but there's 6,839, 11,079, 3,170, 1,680 to 2,784, and 24,298, all on this annual. So I just want to understand more about why twice a year seawater intrusion monitoring is added up to so many charges. Video production, no, I guess that wasn't one. I think that's all I need to ask right now.
Okay. Well, Daniel will answer your questions at the end of public comment.
There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, Daniel, we'll go back to you to answer the questions, please.
Yeah, a couple of responses. The technical support at adaptive management services in the budget has not been spent to this point. The reality is that only about $3,000 of that has been spent, with a remaining budget of $12,000, which was authorized for use in performing the lower aquifer monitoring network evaluation, which for the purposes of this budget is a study on what are the opportunities to improve the lower aquifer monitoring network through potential modifications to existing wells or the construction of a new well. Now, in the context of the later agenda item of the proposed calendar year 2022 budget, the lower aquifer monitoring network improvement budget line item would be actual physical improvements to what's envisioned an existing monitoring well to improve our lower aquifer monitoring network. It seemed like a number of the other comments were directed at the proposed calendar year 2022 budget. And so I think we can cover those when we get to that agenda item. In response to the additional questions, CHG stands for Cleeth Harris Geologists, the Basin Management Committee's hydrogeologist consulting firm. And then the twice a year monitoring, the primary monitoring occurs twice a year, but the costs associated with that program are spread out throughout the year, with labor costs being experienced when the monitoring is performed, but analytical costs taking additional time to be invoiced from the lab and then to Cleeth Harris and then ultimately the BMC. And so that is partially represents why there's more than just two charges associated with that budget item in the invoice register.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Okay, can we have a motion then to approve 6A?
I'll move to approve 6A.
I'll
Okay.
second it.
Okay, Kate's the motion maker and Mark's the seconder. Can we have a vote, a roll call vote, please, Daniel?
Director Cody?
Approve.
Director Ballantyne?
Yes.
Director Zimmer?
Yes.
Chair Ohilsky?
Yes.
Okay, motion passes.
Okay, so the normal procedure is with pulled items is to put them at the end of the agenda. Would you guys like to look at the two pulled items now or hold them off to the end of the agenda? Charlie, I'll ask you since you're the one that pulled them.
I just have a pretty simple comment about it. I could make it now and we could move on.
Okay, let's just, so we'll consider 6B and C right now.
Okay, my comment is about the comments in these two meeting minutes with regard to the item, let's see, item 8A from the October 21 meeting. And there's still a misunderstanding about this. The BMC directors requested that only that the last paragraph of that proposal, item 8A, be removed from consideration before we voted to approve that proposal. It wasn't the intention, and I've gone back and listened to the transcript. It wasn't the intention, I believe, of the Basin Committee directors to reject any methodology or anything else related to the 2020 annual report or the 2020 sustainable yield figure that will be presented in draft form during the spring of next year. So right now, these two meeting minutes indicate that the BMC board directors rejected the use of of a particular methodology for development of the 2020 sustainable yield figure. And I don't believe that that's true. So I don't want the staff to think that they can't go and do something like that. It's just, in my opinion, the committee can't it's too late for the committee to approve any sustainable yield figure for the year 2020 used in the 2020 annual report. That's all. And if I'm sure that there's still some misunderstanding, so please ask questions if you don't understand the nuance here.
Okay, thank you for that clarification, Charlie. Does anybody have any questions of Charlie before we go to public comment?
I guess I'd just like to comment. So my review of the
Excuse me.
the recording was that the direction was to remove the paragraph from the staff report that included the recommendation of applying the calendar year 2022 methodology to the calendar year 2021 sustainable yield estimate. And so that was my that's I believe what the direction that was provided. In subsequent discussions with BMC staff and BMC party staff, removing content from a staff report poses some challenges, in terms of how that would get documented for the purposes of the meeting, so that the direction was characterized as it is in these meeting minutes. I think additional direction was that, for staff to kind of work through how they would want to apply the new sustainable or the updated sustainable yield methodology to the calendar year 2021 annual report, and to bring back those recommendations as part of the draft calendar year 2021 annual report. So I think the understanding is there. It's just we're trying to work within the context of how to document the direction that was given in a way in the meeting minutes that is accurate.
Okay, and thank you for correcting, Dan. I said 2020 annual report and 2020 sustainable yield figure, and you're correct. I meant the 2021 annual report and 2021 sustainable yield figure that will be presented in the spring of next year. So perhaps.
Are you on the same page with Dan, Charlie?
I think so, Dan, as long as we both understand that the committee directors didn't give staff any direction in particular about how to proceed with the 2021 sustainable yield figure. That's the significant thing that I want, that I believe I would like to convey here, is that direction has not been given to the staff, or any rejection of any methodology. The committee did not also reject any particular methodology by removing that paragraph.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe we could go back to the term remove the recommendation to apply the methodology, which basically I think in essence would it would remove that recommendation, but wouldn't be a rejection of that recommendation.
Yeah, I think
that's with your understanding.
That's it, and it's I hate that this is kept becoming pedantic, and this is my fault, and I apologize for this. I think we could probably accept these minutes like they are, with the understanding of this discussion, of the meeting, the meaning of that, if that's okay with you, Dan, and you understand that, and the rest of the committee agrees that we didn't give any direction by that vote for what to do for the 2021 sustainable yield figure. That's still up to the staff to make a proposal there.
That's fine with me.
That makes sense to me too. So do we have any further comments by the committee? Okay, Laura, let's go to public comment, please.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Lindy D, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. This is Lindy Dowd. I think this discussion does illustrate the value of written transcripts. But before you approve of the minutes, I just want to point out that Keith Weimer's name is again spelled incorrectly all throughout the October minutes, because he did speak a number of times, and also in the November minutes in item 9B. There's an extra E that keeps getting put in. His name is spelled Wimer. So please make those corrections to both sets of minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Lindy Owen, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi again. I kind of feel uncomfortable with the way that this last discussion from Charlie amidst all of you about sustainable yield. I see someplace that it's listed at 2380 acre feet per year, and that possibly is incorrect, and it's very important that it be correct. So I hope that you will revisit this as an agenda item and clarify whether we're on the right path with this. It's important. All these little details add up to more loss of our basin if they're not corrected. And then the wording of the minutes is just getting even worse. There's absolutely no detail about any input from the public. I would also support that the transcriptions are really important. A transcript can be read. I mean, they may take hours to produce, but they can be read in a short period of time, whereas having to have the public go through the long agenda item is much more difficult at including their potential to understand what we accomplish at these, what you accomplish at these meetings. So I know you don't want to talk about it, but I think it's really important. And I think if you saved money by not having the meetings, you ought to, again, bring this back and let's see what it costs before you say that we can't have these. The minutes show nothing. So a person that looks at the minutes is forced to go back and listen to whatever length the meeting was. And that's not very open to the public for participation. Thank you.
All right, Lynette, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, Lynette Tornatsky, Los Osos. I was wondering if instead of transcribing the audio, the recordings of these meetings, would it be possible just to put a timestamp at each agenda item so that if people wanted to go and look and listen to what actually happened, they could zip through the recording to get to the place where that topic is being discussed, so they don't have to go through the whole thing. I don't know how hard that would be, but maybe that would be a cheaper, easier way to get people to find what they want to look at or listen to on these recordings. Thank you.
Thank you.
There's no
Okay,
further public comment at this time.
we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee. Does somebody want to make a motion to approve these two items 6? Or further discussion, however you want to go here.
This is Mark. I'll make a motion to approve these two items with the understanding that we discussed from Charlie.
Yeah, and I'll second that, Mark. That sounds good.
Okay, good. All right, Dan, could you take a roll call vote for us, please? This is to approve items 6B and 6C, which are the minutes from November 17th, 2021 and October 27th, 2021. Dan?
Yep, sorry, mute. Director Cody,
Yes.
Director Ballantyne,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair Ohilsky.
Yes.
All right, motion passes.
Okay, we'll move on to item 7, which is public comments for items not appearing on the agenda. So
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you, Mr. Ohilsky. Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I've been following the BMC for 5 years now, over 5 years, and the appearance is that the BMC is devolved, especially in the last 1 or 2 years. And the appearance to me is that you have completely lost your direction. And unfortunately, your executive officer appears also to be taking you in the wrong direction, dominated by expensive consultants, contract administration, and a lot of paper pushing. We've got underway right now, the BMC has reviews, evaluations, studies, reports, and investigations all going on. We've got the funding and organizational study, the pursuit of grants, and usually with grant-driven projects, the metrics and alternative metric evaluation. We've already tinkered with the safe yield. We've got this urban stormwater management plan that's, I'm going to have further comments during the executive director's report. Managing lawyers and consultants, including the Cleeth Harris geologists, who alone has probably anywhere from 4 to 6 tech memos underway right now, including one that relates to Sunset Terrace Mutual, which I will get into under agenda item number 9. What are we doing here? This is paper over pipes. And this is not at all how I envisioned the basin management functioning, bickering over minutes. I thought this committee was going to help the purveyors, that is Golden State and the LOCSD, advance basin plan projects. And that's hardly what you're doing. Frankly, 2022 looks like it's going to be a disaster for this group. And again, led by Daniel Heimel. And one has to ask themselves, as the contract was transferred, the so-called management contract, that I get the feeling that the BMC was simply in a pawn, used as a pawn in a negotiation between Heimel and his former employer, WSC. WSC said, yeah, you can have the BMC if we get CCB in Pismo Beach. Thank you.
All right, Jeff, you've reached your 3 minutes.
Thank you.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi again. Yeah, I wanted to discuss the general conflict of interest that the county has with issuing new permits for development, and the fact that at our recent LOCAC meeting, or land use meeting, excuse me, for LOCAC, it was brought up, one of the new permit people in the county agreed that we're in a weird situation in that our committee has said, based on the lack of assurance that we have a sustainable basin currently, we are going to be, any project that comes forward for a new home or ADU or any of these things, we're going to give an overall, we'll say that the project is fine, but we cannot approve it because of extra water use that we are not comfortable with. So we're kind of in a catch-22. The county continues issuing permits for high-end housing. We're not addressing anything with affordable housing at the least, which is what we really lack. And so I just think there's a major conflict of interest with the county being able to continue allowing, I mean, and some of these people that have applied for permits have spent large amounts of money. And at the end, we have to give a denial because it is new water use. We don't feel even the offsets are set up correctly. So again, if we're trying to protect a basin, we're looking all over the west Western United States, groundwater is drying up and disappearing. We're headed for a lot of trouble in many other communities. I don't want us to be one that goes that direction either and wakes up in 5 years and goes, geez, we shouldn't have been doing so much growth. So I think we need to, I would propose that we look at supporting a moratorium until we have solid facts that we have enough water to provide for new growth. Thank you.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. The CSD is looking for outside water sources, and just this last storm, we had a huge one that came down on top of us, relatively speaking, of course, for our area. And a lot of it ran out into the bay, especially there's that outfall on right in Baywood by the pier. And I know when all that was designed or put in, we never thought about having a water basin that was in overdraft and that we needed to save water. But I think things like that, that would be a good place to be putting some of our money instead of thinking about state water, which isn't really available too much, or in the cost of bringing it in. This is water that we have that we should be holding on to. So that's something that I think the CSD and also the Basin Management Committee should start looking at as far as a source of water, is just the storm runoff. Thank you.
There's no further public comment at this time. Marshall, you're muted.
I'm sorry, I apologize. With that, we'll move on to number 8, item number 8 on the agenda, which is the executive director's report. So Daniel, that is yours.
Thank you, Marshall. Yeah, so for item 8, the executive director's report, I'll hit the items that have been updated from the previous version and then be available for questions from the committee. Moving down the list, the first item that we updated here is the Prop 1 stormwater grant, and there were questions that were brought up at the last BMC meeting about a stormwater project that has been identified for Los Osos, and so we have included in the executive director's report information on that project and where it can be identified in the local stormwater and other water resource plans, as well as additional information about that grant program. Moving down, I have an update on the status of the BMC initiatives, and we've been able to make some progress on some of these initiatives. The first is the lower aquifer transducer installation. Since March, Cleith Harris Geologists has been working with well owners to gain access and install transducers into a number of monitoring wells to help us improve our understanding of how the Broderson Mound is developing, and recently was able to equip 2 additional wells, 2 additional county wells with transducers. Actually, sorry, I should say 4 wells, and that it completes the installation of the transducer program with 7 new added units. The basin metric evaluation, Cleith Harris Geologists is making good progress on that. However, as you can see from the agenda today, we don't have that updated recommendations with respect to the metrics available for the BMC today, but we anticipate reviewing those at a staff level here in before the end of the month and into January, and then bringing forth those recommendations to the BMC for their consideration in Q1 2022. And then finally, on October 27th, the BMC authorized Twin Cities and Cleith Harris Geologists to survey the additional kind of wells or high priority wells where we needed improved elevation information. That survey was completed at the end of November and early December, and that the county has also mobilized a surveyor from their organization to survey the wells in the county's monitoring program and obtained more accurate reference elevation information. All of this will help improve the development of our groundwater elevation contours, potentially our metrics, and our understanding of basin conditions. Just an update on the funding the funding study evaluation. SCI has initiated their efforts and has submitted a data request to the BMC parties. The BMC parties have fulfilled that data request, and SCI is in the process of beginning their initial evaluations of the different funding options that are potentially available to the BMC, as well as the development of a funding model, which will allow us to quantify potential monetary impacts or the magnitude of potential fees associated with the different potential funding options for funding ongoing BMC monitoring and management, funding the construction of major capital projects, and or funding ongoing operations and maintenance of capital projects. At the time that the executive director's report was published, I didn't have updated information on the flows from the wharf and to the different disposal or recycled water sites. However, I do have information now for October, and generally the flow ratios are similar to what we saw in previous months, with additional water going to Broderson, 43 acre feet in the month of October. And that concludes the executive director's report.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Any questions of Daniel's executive director report?
Yes, I'd like some clarification. I was assuming that we were going to get a proposal about these new transducers and the monitoring that would be going on. But now I see that we've gone beyond that. And without a doubt, this was mentioned at staff meetings. But what are these new transducers going to be monitoring? Static well levels or some particular water quality parameters, perhaps? I don't believe this has ever been presented to the committee in a proposal.
Yeah, so the transducers were proposed, and I believe they were included in the Cleith Harris geologist proposal as a portion of the monitoring network program for 2021. They are water level transducers that will be installed in a network of wells in and around the Broderson disposal site, and will be used to collect static water levels, however, hopefully dynamic water levels as that mound increases. But the general intent is that these transducers will allow us to better understand how the Broderson mound is developing over time.
So not water quality, only pressure.
Only pressure, correct.
Okay, thank you very much.
And will the transducer information be used in our monitoring report that's coming out? Not for 2021, but will we incorporate that into our 2022 data set?
Yes, yeah. I'm sure there'll be a discussion about the data that these transducers are able to collect. Yeah, unfortunately, we won't have a lot of data collected in 2021, but moving forward, we will have sort of detailed, much more granular, instead of getting measurements twice a year, these transducers will collect water level data at 15-minute or some other much more granular interval, and we'll be able to track water levels in these wells over time.
Okay, good. And then if we move into a transient model, is this information going to be helpful for that modeling effort or to validate the model or anything like that? Is that something that we're going to use in the future with our transient model?
Yes, yeah, this data will be valuable as part of the calibration phase for the transient model. So we'll be able to, again, track kind of water level trends, seasonal water level trends, long-term water level trends in these wells, and then, ideally structure the groundwater model and calibrate it so that it matches these observed seasonal and longer term trends.
Okay, good, great. A couple more quick questions. Cody, or Charlie, if you're done, I got a couple more questions.
Yes, I've asked mine.
Okay, thank you. The wellhead survey, when do you anticipate we'll get the results from that? I know you gave us an update, it's in progress, but are we going to see that in our next BMC meeting, or do you think it's going to take a little bit longer than that to go through and prepare the report and the additional effort needed?
I think we should likely be able to have that available at the next BMC meeting if the BMC would like to see kind of the results of that exercise. We can bring that forth.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I was just thinking, as we're working through our budget, if there's additional work that needs to be done on that, it would be nice to include some of that in our budget, but I guess we could use our contingency for that if needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think my understanding is that the survey is completed, and really meaning that, the majority of the work has been done. And so there will be a report that the surveyor produces, but, it's a relatively simple report. I think we presented one to the BMC at the end of the last survey. But the real value in that survey is being able to use those updated reference elevations in the water level calculations and in the interpretation of groundwater conditions in the annual report. So that's really when we'll see the benefits, is in the development of the 2021 annual report. And then I guess in response, I would need to check back in with the county to see the schedule for the survey of their wells. I want to say it may be done, but I can't confirm that right now. So I'll check in with them to see when that will be completed and those results will be available.
Very good. And then the status of the basic plan implementation and funding plans. We have 40,000 budgeted in 2021, but nothing for 2022. And we have zero spent to date. I'm just under the impression that we haven't been invoiced for services to date, but is there any additional work that's going to need to be done in 2022? Because I noticed we didn't have anything budgeted for this.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. And yeah, so we will be asking SCI to invoice for any of the work completed this calendar year. And the work will extend into calendar year 2022. I think at this point it's envisioned that those costs could be carried over via contingency, or if we want, we can budget a specific line item in the calendar year 2022 budget for that.
And have you had any conversation with them that there's anticipated additional funding needed for any reason?
So we don't anticipate additional funding other than what was authorized with their proposal. Now the timing in which those funds will be expended, as you just identified, will extend into 2022. There are potential next steps for the funding study, and what we've talked about at a staff level is that once we have the results of the funding study, we have an improved understanding of the different funding mechanisms and options. We have results from the funding model, which will inform, better inform the BMC and the parties on the magnitude of some of these potential fees or special taxes that would be required to fund BMC on monitoring and management or capital projects. A next step could be to then begin polling the community on the willingness to approve the conceptual funding mechanisms or the recommended funding mechanisms identified in the funding study. And that, that could include a number, I think what has been discussed primarily would be the development and distribution of surveys to community members, and then collecting, compiling, and analyzing those results. At a BMC staff level, we talked about that. We didn't include a specific line item for that in the proposed calendar year 2022 budget for a couple of reasons. One, we didn't know if we were going to be ready to initiate polling and surveys in calendar year 2022, just depending on the length, of time it will take to, we figure we'll get the funding study report sometime at the end of Q1 2022, but we anticipate it taking some time for the BMC to review the findings of that report, discuss the different options, develop BMC recommendations, and then at which point we'd be ready to potentially do funding if that's what the BMC would like to do. So we didn't know if that was going to happen in 2022, but we did have other initiatives that we really felt were critical for including in the 2022 budget. And so those are included in the next item. However, we also talked about if we find ourselves in a place where we feel like polling is a critical next step and we're ready to take that step in 2022, that eventually we could use contingency funding at that point to fund that initiative.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. It's just such a pivotal decision in how we proceed. I want to make sure that we stay on track with it the best of our ability and keep things moving forward. I don't want to do this effort and then get the results and sit stagnant for a while. So I think just really that'll either we close the door on it or we proceed with additional efforts to keep it moving forward, and then that way we can make the appropriate decisions either way it goes, right? So okay, sounds good.
All right, thanks.
Yeah, and we can utilize, it's a somewhat overused term these days, but adaptive management as we progress through 2022. One of the things we'll get results from the lower aquifer monitoring well evaluation. We'll get results from the funding study. And, at that point, we can make more dynamic decisions around how the BMC wants to focus its resources for the second half of the year.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments before we go to public comment?
Yeah, I just had one, Kate, here from the county. Dan had that question about the county's portion of the wellhead survey. I know that work has been done. Updated elevation reference numbers have been submitted to CLEAF, but they might be checking one or two, but that's an update on the county's work effort there.
Okay, anybody else? All right, Laura, let's go to public comment on the executive director's report, please.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Deborah, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you. Deborah Howe with the Los Osos Community Advisory Council. Regarding the capture and reuse of stormwater, I appreciate you putting in some additional information about that project at 8th and El Moro. However, I did have an opportunity to speak to the CSD about this project, so I had a better understanding of what was involved. And I was told that it's actually not a good idea to send stormwater to the recycling plant and that this was not going to be a viable project. So that said, I would hate for staff to take any time applying for a grant for a project that doesn't look like it's going to go anywhere. So if I've misunderstood something about that project, I'd like to, I'm all ears. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Edwards, and I'm speaking to the ED report item 8. And as just was referenced, this 8th and El Moro stormwater capture and reuse plan is not feasible. And why Mr. Heimel has spent time on this pursuing a grant or any part of it is exactly what I was talking about at general public comment. This is unnecessary work. We don't need grant-driven projects, and especially ones that aren't feasible. Then there's the basin metric evaluation. Analysis of alternative metric approaches. It's in progress. It's supposed to be presented in Q1 of next year. I have no idea what this is about. And I follow these meetings. I read the staff reports. I have virtually zero understanding of what this is about. And frankly, I think it's another waste of time. Then we can go to the JPA formation, one of my favorite topics. Well, the SCI group, we've wasted $20,000 on them. There's three components that your ED referenced. Monitoring and management of your committee, about $300K a year. It's been that way for a while. There's capital projects, which you have no business being involved in now or even as a JPA, and then the operation and maintenance of those capital projects. The purveyors are developing the capital projects. LOCSD's putting in wells. Golden State likewise. They're putting in pipelines. The basin, you don't need a JPA. You don't need capital projects. You don't need to own anything. The monitoring wells, that's your purview. The rest of the basin plan projects, not your purview. We don't need, I don't care what the results of this study are going to be. We don't need it. Close the door as was suggested. Again, a waste of time. Then we go to BMC legal counsel, another favorite of mine. Why your ED needs his own legal counsel? It looks to me like fiefdom building to me. So then there's the Program B implementation process and funding. And there's reference here that the existing Golden State Water Company facility at Rosina and Skyline is going to be somehow converted to a community facility. That's the chances of that about 1 in a million. And then lastly, kind of just a record keeping, Mr. Heimel obviously wasn't aware, but the cannabis project that is on page 8 of his report, the so-called Wild Coast Farms, that's been withdrawn. So you can take that off your report, Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
There's no further public comment at this time.
Okay, we'll close public comment and bring it back to the committee. Do you have any additional comments? Okay, it sounds like we don't. So let's move on to item 9A, which is something that's been being talked about all day today. So now we can actually get to it. So calendar year 2022 Basin Management Committee budget. The recommendation is it's recommended that the BMC 1 receive recommendations and approve the calendar year 2022 BMC budget. 2, approve calendar year 2022 BMC executive director and hydrologist consultant proposals, or 3, provide alternate direction to staff. So with that, then we'll go ahead, Daniel, and you're on.
Thank you, Marshall. So as outlined in the BMC rules and regulations, the BMC is directed to adopt an annual budget for the following year at the first meeting following December 1st of the current year. And so this is an agenda item to provide a proposed budget for the calendar year 2022. Go to the next slide, please. In addition to the baseline budget items, which we'll cover in the next slide, but basically pertain to the executive director and the BMC's hydrogeologists and the roles that they provide in allowing the BMC and the BMC parties to comply with the requirements of the stipulated judgment. There are a couple of other proposed items for the calendar year 2022 budget, and I've highlighted these on these two slides. The first one is BMC legal counsel contingency. And I have some slides to cover this in more detail later on in the presentation. Same with the year one of the water recycling funding study. But these are two items that you'll see included in the budget. And I will defer going into these in detail until we get to the latter slides. If we go to the next slide, we have three additional items that were identified through discussions with BMC staff and BMC party staff for inclusion in the proposed calendar year 2022 budget. The first one is the lower aquifer monitoring well improvement budget item. So as discussed earlier, the BMC authorized Clearterrace geologists to complete a lower aquifer monitoring well improvement evaluation, and that work is underway, and we anticipate recommendations from that work here soon. Those recommendations will be recommendations on opportunities to make physical modifications to existing wells within the basin to allow us to collect more accurate data from the specific zones in the lower aquifer, that's zones D and E, as well as recommendations on potential opportunities for installing new monitoring wells to improve our monitoring network for the lower aquifer. The budget item we have here is anticipated to cover one of the potential opportunities to modify one of the existing wells to improve our lower aquifer monitoring network. We did not, or staff did not feel or identify that there was sufficient budget in calendar year 2022 to fund a new dedicated monitoring well, and or we would want to see the results of this study before including an item of that magnitude in the budget. But we have included a proposed budget item to allow us to do physical modifications to existing wells to improve our monitoring of the lower aquifer network. The next item is the Los Osos Creek stream gauge rating curve. So those of you may or may not know, there is a stream gauge on Los Osos Creek near the LOVR bridge that collects stage or basically water level data in the creek. However, unfortunately, to be able to translate that data into a flow rate, we would need a rating curve, and there is currently not a rating curve available for the Los Osos Creek stream gauge. And so this budget item would be for the field investigations to go out during rain events or other storm events, measure the flow within the creek at different flow rates, and then be able to correlate that to the gauge readings for those flow rates and develop a rating curve, which would then allow us to take all of the gauge data or water level data that the gauge is currently collecting and translate that into a flow rate in the creek, which is a much more useful and beneficial piece of information for our understanding of how much water is flowing in the creek, potentially how much creek water is percolating down into the aquifer, and is an important component of the calibration and the development of the transient groundwater model. And then the third item, lower aquifer nitrate investigation. I think has been mentioned at the BMC, S&T Mutual began an evaluation of the potential sources of lower aquifer nitrate contamination in and around their production wells. It has been identified that there are several additional next steps to improve that evaluation and improve the BMC's and S&T's understanding of the sources of the lower aquifer nitrate contamination impacting those wells and potentially other lower aquifer wells within the basin. And so this is a budget item to provide funding to allow for the collection of the additional information to improve the understanding of the potential sources of contamination contributing to increased nitrates in lower aquifer in the LAH and surrounding portions of the basin. As I mentioned before, the BMC legal counsel, there's a budget item for a BMC contingency for special legal counsel. This is just some quotes from the staff report, but you know, the BMC is a separate governing body created pursuant to the court approved stipulated judgment to administer, enforce, implement the provisions of the stipulated judgment, the basic plan, and subsequent orders from the court. In order to permit the BMC to carry out its purposes, the stipulated judgment authorizes, among other things, the BMC to employ or otherwise contract with services of agents, officers, employees, attorneys, engineers, planners, financial consultants, technical specialists, advisors, and independent contractors. So as we'll be discussing later, the BMC has historically employed or contracted with hydrogeologists, engineers, and other specialty consultants to support its operations moving forward, but has to date has not contracted with dedicated legal counsel for the purposes of providing third-party legal counsel specifically for the BMC. The legal services that the BMC has relied upon to date have been provided by the individual parties, and having dedicated BMC legal counsel or a contingency for that would provide an interim solution where the BMC could have access to dedicated legal counsel for circumstances when legal counsel for an individual party has a conflict or bias given the interests of that party and when they may differ from the BMC as a whole, or two, circumstances where more than one counsel has opined and they disagree on kind of the legal direction that they think the BMC should take with respect to certain items, or three, contentious or complex matters that may arise where independent counsel should be sought. You know, in other words, matters involving financial statutory authorities, including in connection with the pending funding study. And so on the next slide, we just identified a couple of tasks where it would be necessary or beneficial to have dedicated BMC legal counsel. One of the first ones obviously is compliance with the stipulated judgment and or the adjudication. So the second one is Public Records Act request compliance. A third would be development of BMC procurement policy and oversight of that policy. BMC contract review with the consultants and technical specialists it employs to support its efforts. The BMC funding options analysis. There are a number of legal questions that will have come up and will come up as the BMC evaluates the different funding options and the requirements for the implementation of a Prop 218 regulatory or other fee mechanism. BMC organizational structural analysis and implementation, and more specifically, the potential formation of a JPA to support the BMC in its monitoring and management. What's been proposed is that this budget item at this point, again, as kind of a compromise or an interim measure, would be a contingency item. So not necessarily authorizing the use of, what's included in the budget of $20,000 per year, but authorizing the BMC staff to be able to at least contract with dedicated legal counsel, and when necessary, coordinate and get legal advice from that counsel on behalf of the BMC. Next slide, please. The other item in the budget, the $15,000 for year one of the water recycling funding program grant study / transient model. This slide provides a detailed breakdown of the individual tasks and associated costs that are envisioned for within that study. So there are certain requirements within the grant that require for certain project management and administrative functions. But also what's included in this project management task is or envisioned in this task is the development and the facilitation of a technical advisory committee. So as the study moves forward and the model is developed, it is envisioned that technical representatives from the BMC parties would be able to participate in that project in a meaningful way, to be able to ask questions, gain an understanding, and ultimately help lead to the development of a transient model and a recycled water options study that has additional buy-in from the parties and has the benefit of being able to get input from technical representative from each of the components, each of the BMC parties. Then the transient model itself is obviously, that's the bulk of the cost associated with the water recycling funding study. And then there's no point in developing a model if you're not going to use it. So the next item is scenario analysis. That's for utilizing the model to evaluate the benefits of recycled water and other sustainable yield improvement opportunity projects. And so where there's some comments earlier about recycled water going to the wharf and that not being viable, that's just one of the many potential opportunities for the use of that recycled water. And so the scenario analysis would allow us to evaluate all the different uses of recycled water within the basin, the benefits and costs associated with that, as well as reevaluation of the other basin plan programs B and D, and other potential supplemental supply opportunities that Los Osos may have available to it. And so that's really the importance of the scenario analysis. The next item is the model development peer review. Again, similar to the technical advisory committee, in my experience, I've found, and many others as well, is if you can engage a peer review consultant or hydrologist throughout the process of developing a transient model and utilizing that transient model to better understand potential future basin conditions, it really leads to a better product, and a product that people have more faith in and buy-in in, that it's not just one hydrogeologist's opinion. It was a tool that was built with the oversight of multiple technical experts and or committee members. Finally, moving down, then we have the supplemental supply alternatives evaluation. That's really goes hand in hand with the scenario analysis. The scenario analysis is the use of the model to run those predictive model simulations to understand the value that the different recycled water and other supplemental supply projects could provide, and also just even non-project related scenarios. What would conditions in the basin potentially look like in 40 years if we did nothing? That's, a baseline project is almost more important as any project. But you also need to understand what are the kind of engineering and other costs associated with these different projects. And so the supplemental supply alternatives evaluation is really that preliminary engineering to develop the concepts and the cost estimates to go hand in hand with these other projects that then can be fed into the model to see what benefits they could provide. And then finally, the report development. The grant opportunity we're evaluating here requires the development of a draft and a final study report with certain required components. And so that $30,000 would be to develop that grant compliant report. So total cost here is $330,000. It's anticipated that this study could be funded through a water recycling funding grant with a contribution of $150,000 of outside funding. Additionally, the county has budgeted $150,000 of funding for a transient model for the Los Osos Basin. So after you take into account those outside funding sources, it nets only a $30,000 cost for the BMC based on the estimates provided here. And this project is anticipated to take 2 years to complete. So that cost to the BMC in calendar year 2022 would be $15,000. And that's what you'll see in the budget break, or the proposed budget on the next page. So here's bringing it all together, the baseline services, the proposed specific budget task item that I just described in detail, and then the 10% contingency yields the total BMC budget proposed for calendar year 2022 of $316,300, and then is broken down amongst the BMC parties based on the previously agreed upon percentages shown below. And is that, I'm trying to remember, is there any, can you go to the next slide? Oh, yes, thank you. If the BMC is in agreement with the proposed budget or portions of the proposed budget, staff recommends that the BMC additionally authorize the specific proposals for executive director services, the 2021 annual monitoring report, the 2022 groundwater monitoring program, and the development of a rating curve for the Los Osos stream gauge, so that those activities can initiate on January 1 of 2022, if not sooner. This is important for a number of reasons. One, the BMC has a court deadline to prepare the annual report. Also, two, needs to complete the monitoring within traditional timeframes to develop a consistent data set. But then three, finally, for the stream gauge rating curve, we've been we've been lucky to have some recent rainfall here, and there is more rainfall in the forecast. And so with authorization of that proposal, that would provide an opportunity for Clearwater geologists to get out, hopefully capture stream flow data in what hopefully are some relatively significant rain events here in the next couple of weeks. And that concludes my presentation on item 9A, the calendar year 2022 BMC budget.
Okay, let's start off with some questions from committee members, please.
Marshall, I can go first if there's no other questions, but so Dan, thank you for the presentation. A lot of content there. Let me just, I have a few comments on each of the different areas. I think I'm going to save the BMC legal for last, but regarding the groundwater model initiative. So thanks for revising how it appears in our budget. I know we talked about that last meeting. And then the clarification that the BMC is going to contribute $30,000, $15,000 each year. But another part of our discussion was, where does that $30,000 fit in? And my impression was that it was going to be under the model development and peer review, that we had a discussion about running additional scenarios that may be helpful. And so I didn't see that part in the budget, and I know you had a breakdown. There was a couple items that had $30,000 in that breakdown. So I was a little bit confused on where that might fit into the breakdown, or when we would spend that funding. What I don't want to see is that the BMC fund it right out of the gates and provide the seed money to get this going. I don't think that was our intent. Our intent was more to use the model once it and participate in the peer review portion of it. So wanted to make that comment on the transient groundwater model. Regarding the lower aquifer monitoring well improvements, support this budget. I mean, that's, monitoring is just such an important aspect of what we're doing here in the BMC. So like to see those projects come forward. The creek stream gauge, we've been talking about that for some time, and it's unfortunate we missed this last event that we had, but I think it's important for us to understand the need and have it in place to capture the flow in the creek. So support that one. The lower aquifer nitrate investigation that also another important aspect of the basin management, nitrate contamination is prevalent throughout the basin, but really not well understood in this portion of the basin. I know it focuses in on an S&T or was brought to the BMC by S&T for specifically for their well. And I think we just need to be cautious about purveyor specific projects getting into our budget. But overall, I agree to support this one. Just kind of wanted to make that comment, having more general, so it benefits all of our effort here. And so we're happy to participate in this. I think it will benefit, the other purveyors, our understanding of the basin. So just wanted to provide that comment there. And then my last thing, going to the legal counsel contingency for 20,000. This is a new line item for us. It is a concern about the expense and dedicating legal counsel and the lack of the identifying these specific needs. And I know you put a few examples up there on the board, but we really haven't had those come before us. The public records request, those I do see some need for this, but I just want to be cautious about it. And I'm not sure if I'm in agreement with how it's presented in our budget today. So it did come before us pretty quick, and I don't know if we've had a lot of time to evaluate how it's structured, but there are some other options for meeting this need, and one of the things I want to be sensitive to is your need, that for you to do the job that we've hired you to do. I think you do need to have some legal or access to legal advice. So I want to be supportive of your needs too. And so just throwing out a couple other options, instead of it being a contingency under the BMC, maybe it's a contingency under your contract, that we, have that as a line item for you to access, and we put some constraints on it. Maybe there's a $5,000 limit at your discretion, and then any other additional would have to come before the board. And then so just a couple other options out there. We could use it under our contingency funding and expand on that. And we have 10% right now. We increase that contingency to say 20% or something like that, and have a additional funding that we have, could use in the event we needed it for legal. So, right now I would struggle with that the way it's presented, but definitely want to meet the need and see the need. Just think we could better understand it, setting the precedence for this to be in our budget today. I think legal expenses are something that we have to be extremely cautious about, because they can escalate so fast, and just once we have that as a line item in our budget, future budgets could potentially increase based on past spending practices. So I'll kind of leave those comments there. Let's hear some public comment, and also comment from other board members. Then we can come back.
Okay, thank you, Mark. And if I could put my attorney's hat on for a minute here, I think there are potential conflicts where we really can't use any of the parties' attorneys. But I think the idea that you initially raised about making that contingency fund where that money would be available to Dan where legal services were necessary, with a limit where it would have to come back to the board of $5,000. I think that's really the best step for this first step to take. So I'm very, very supportive of doing it that route rather than having it as a line item. So can we have other comments before we go to public comment?
Well, this is Charlie from S&T. I have comments, but I don't really have questions where I'd be asking for clarification.
Okay,
Would you prefer that we have our comments after public comments or?
yes, yes.
Okay, then I'll wait.
Okay, I'll wait as well.
Okay, Laura, let's go to public comment on the 2022 proposed budgets.
If you'd like to make a public comment, please raise your hand. All right, Babak, you just have to unmute yourself.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm Babak Nafisi. I'm an attorney and I work with the sustainability group. I strongly support the request for funding for an independent counsel for the BMC. I think it would be a mistake to see that attorney as representing Dan or anybody other than the BMC, which is an independent entity. I think had the BMC had its own attorney that would advise Dan and the board on how to proceed under the basin plan, some of the issues that came up with respect to the safe yield determination and frankly the mess that the board recognized that the sustainable yield had not been arrived at through the appropriate procedure, and yet it was retained because the board, the BMC was reluctant to make last minute changes. Like all of that could have been avoided. I don't see that this is a small issue that you can just throw a $5,000 contingency at it. I think it's long overdue for the BMC to have its own counsel, and I strongly urge you to approve the budget request as is. Thank you.
All right, Jeff, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. My name is Jeff Edwards, and with regard to the BMC expenditure of $7,000 for a phase 2 lower aquifer nitrate investigation, I couldn't more strongly object. This is basically a gift of public funds to the Sunset Terrace Mutual Water Company. Frankly, it borders on the absurd. This has never been discussed. And as you may know, I don't know if any of you have read it, but Cleith Harris produced the phase 1 tech memo for S&T in a report dated September 24th, 2021. Again, this is a complete waste of staff time, your time, and your money. The backdrop is S&T put their well in the wrong place. It's incurring increasingly poor water quality, and they want to find somebody to blame. So their phase 1 report seemed to blame Cabrillo Estates and their septic systems. Now they want to explore and possibly blame the horse stables on Seahorse Lane or maybe over on Seawind. But this is absolutely an absurdity for the BMC to fund this. I'm surprised there's not an outrage on the part of this committee, because this is, again, a gift of public funds. Then there's the discussion of the lawyer. We've been doing this meeting for 5 years now, and I'm not sure any of the 3 contingencies that Heimel cited have ever come up that would trigger the need for this legal counsel. And I will tell you that if and when a legal counsel for the BMC is introduced, they will start out at $5,000 and they will ratchet their way up until they're a $30,000 to $40,000 to $50,000 a year position, and they'll be involved in virtually everything. Again, strongly object to any idea that the BMC or the ED gets legal counsel. And then lastly, This WRPF study, the first year, mind you, is for a planning grant. I don't know where any of this is going. Consistent with my earlier remarks, your committee has lost its direction. You are pushing paper and creating work. Your ED is creating work for himself and for other consultants. You're paying money through the nose for nothing. I'm in a state of shock. Thank you.
All right, Lindy, you just have to unmute yourself.
Lindy Owen, I really think that things have seemingly gotten more complicated over time from the original work that was being done. As far as the 7,000 for S&T, whether it's S&T and other areas that might be showing high nitrates, I think it's pretty darn important. S&T wells can no longer provide water because of the nitrate pollution that has increased. And it's not just from horse stables, it's gravity. It's called Cabrillo Estates. It's also called fertilizing a golf course. Those things need to be addressed. If this study leads to putting Cabrillo Estates and the horse stables into better monitoring of the release of their waters and cleaning it before it pollutes the ground, we have more players that can help contribute to our basin. Someplace I did see something about how all basin users would be contributing in some kind of a way. Well, currently, all the private wells don't contribute anything. So I don't know why we would not want to see if we couldn't tighten up the pollution that is coming from that area. The lawyer, I think, is important, but I'll agree the cost is going to go up because the lawyer will be used for every little thing. It's probably a good idea to have a nonpartisan lawyer involved. I'm not sure if we can accomplish that because water is a different issue in California these days. I guess I wanted to just say I see a lot of confusion of new projects coming on that may not even be valid to be looking at. For instance, the stormwater one, that seems like we shouldn't be wasting too much more money with that. As far as the stream gauge rating curve, I think that's something that's been discussed for 6 years now to see if that might not be a better place to put water than Broderson. Again, Broderson is costing us a ton of money. We're putting all of the recycled water there practically, and we don't know if it's even going to accomplish what we want. We're, on hold with that. So I think it's really important to look at recycled water and ag use exchange. Issues like that should be up at the top. Thank you.
All right, Patrick, you just have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Patrick McGivney with the Sustainability Group, and I totally agree the fact that the BMC needs their own attorney for all the reasons that Dan had mentioned, and also the ones that Babak Nafisi had mentioned, dealing with the sustainable yield issue that came about in the middle of this year, which I'd like to talk about, which is going to be dealing with the Basin Management Committee Professional Services Report, dealing with the sustainable yield and everything. The reason I bring this up is because Cleith Harris geologists are proposing in its scope of the work for the 2021 annual report due out in June that the preview for the 2023 sustainable yield is provided, and that shouldn't happen because you'll not be able to consider all the data in the 2022 at that point. It would be premature and not consistent with the stipulated judgment or new methodology. Approving the annual report should not include approving next year's sustainable yield. That should be done independently, as you all talked about in the beginning. Also, the stream flow, the rating curve that you're going to be putting in. I think that's a great idea, but what that shows me is that the 800 acre feet of annual stream flow is only a guesstimate. You never talked about this when you approved this in any of your committee meetings. The purveyors never had a chance to comment on it. And I'm not really sure what you're going to do with the 800 acre feet, because that has a lot to do with the basin yield metric, dealing with the sustainable yield. So your stream flow that you have at 800 acre feet and your annual precipitation at 17.3 inches all has to do with what your sustainable yield is going to be. So I really do support that you get that gauge in, and hopefully we'll get more rain coming in. But you know, in the last storms that we've had at our home in Baywood, we have recorded less than 3.5 inches. So we need to have probably 5 or 6, 7 more of these large storms that are coming through to get to the 17.2 inches that, or 3 inches that we have been predicting will be coming. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Patrick.
There's no further public comment at this time.
All right, we'll close public comment and bring it back. So Charlie, you said you had some comments?
Yes, I do. I really like to thank, this is new this year. Dan has put together quite a more formal presentation for a budget than we've seen since we began in 2015. I very much appreciate this effort. I'm in complete in support of the legal counsel contingency, and I hope, Marshall, that you could expand a little bit on your suggestion about how to fund that as a contingency fund that Dan could pull from, although you know the anticipated cost of $20,000 is a good start at that. Going down to the new model, the WRFP that we've in the past we've called the transient model. I hope that well, I just want to expand a little bit on Mark Zimmer's comment on this. I also share Mark's concern that the 3 purveyors in the county, or especially the 3 purveyors, would be funding this project on the front end, since this is really a county effort. I'd like to think that, I think I agree with Mark's comment that the beginning of BMC funding or contributions to this might begin with the anticipated peer review of this. And I really would like to, I'm more of a technical person, and I'm very interested in seeing something like a logical flow chart for the proposed transient model, really in the early days of this. And if that means that I have to maybe attend some of these technical meetings of the party staff, then so be it. But I'm very interested in the technical development of this model and what the inputs would be. Moving down to the Los Osos Creek stream gauge rating curve development for $25,000. Here's what I understand, or perhaps misunderstand, about this project. There's an existing gauge located under a bridge, but it's not calibrated and it's not instrumented. And the proposal is for $25,000 to develop a stream gauge rating curve. Now, I have a question about this, and my question is any of this $25,000 going to installing instrumentation and perhaps a SCADA instrument on this gauge to make it practical? Or is this $25,000 all laboratory work, field laboratory work for calibrating this instrument, the existing gauge that's there? And now, I'm sorry, I'm going to create a little confusion because I'm going to move along. Or if you'd prefer, I can stop at this point and ask my last questions and comments about the nitrate investigation. Perhaps I'll stop and come back to that.
Okay, yeah, we can stop and come back to you. Kate, you said you had some comments too?
Yeah, I did. Thank you, Marshall. So the proposed budget as is presented, the county supports the projects that have been presented. But so far as legal counsel goes, I mean, this isn't the first time you've heard this, but the county is very supportive of the BMC having their own legal counsel, that would resolve any competing interests between individual party councils and the BMC as an entity. So, we'd really like to see a budgeted line item so that formal legal decisions of the BMC can be made on the advice of BMC's legal counsel. I'm in support of the line item as is proposed and could see, a more formal, maybe RFP for particular legal needs in the future. But I think that, setting this up as a contingency, as long as this amount of money would cover the needs for the BMC in the upcoming year, the county would support it as is. That's all I have on that.
Okay, thank you, Kate. Mark, would you like to chime in before Charlie moves on to the nitrates?
Actually, Marshall, if you don't mind, can I address some of the questions that came up?
Sure. Go ahead, Dan. I'm sorry.
Yeah, so, and Zimmer's comments. So the two that hopefully I can help address. The first was the BMC's contribution to the water recycling funding study, the $30,000. Yeah, it's not specifically called out what specific component the BMC would provide. But I think staff has been thinking along the lines as the directors that, the peer review component of that could be the BMC's contribution, and would be beneficial for a couple of reasons. One, it's likely it would be a separate contract from, the consultant that would be doing the study and the transient model development. Two, it isn't a front load cost. That's a cost that would be carried through all throughout the project and the 2-year period. And then three, yeah, no, it's not envisioned that the BMC would front load the cost for getting this project going. What's envisioned is that the grant funds would be obtained, the approval from the county to access the county funding would be obtained, at which point then the BMC would execute contracts for that work. Well, in reality, and what we've talked about, and we haven't talked about in detail at the BMC level, but likely the CSD would be the lead agency for this work, and that the BMC wouldn't contract directly, except for potentially the peer review portion. So hopefully that's helpful, but I'm available to answer other questions with respect to the BMC's contribution, the 30,000 out of the 330,000. And then to Director Cody's question about the stream gauge rating curve, my understanding is that there is a stream gauge there. It is instrumented. It is calibrated in the fact that it is collecting accurate water level or staged data, but it is not calibrated in the sense that there is a associated rating curve that allows you to correlate that stage or water level to a flow rate. And so the activities proposed in the scope and budget from Cleve Harris Geologists is not for equipment, but is for the field work or necessary to develop that rating curve. And that was it.
Okay, thank you, Daniel. Mark, do you have any questions you'd like to ask? Or comments?
Yeah, just more additional comments. So, just let me clarify, it's not that I don't think that the need is there as much as how it's presented in the details for me to approve it as a line item. I just don't see, we haven't needed it to date. Being there from the origination of the ISJ document and the basin plan, sitting in on those meetings, all of our agencies had legal counsel present during that development. And so, there was never the concept of having a BMC legal representative. So, now we're transitioning to that and really have to understand what does that entail for Golden State. Ultimately, we're funding a large portion of that along with the district. And so, I have to be, understand that. And so, one approach is that we could leave this line item off of approving the budget so we can get some of these other initiatives underway for 2021 and bring it back to the board after, staff has additional conversations and bring it back at our next board meeting. Or, as it sits right now, I would have trouble approving that line item the way that it sits currently.
This is Kate here, Mark. Would it help to give some sort of parameters around how that contingency would be spent upon BMC approval on a case-by-case basis? Would that help alleviate some concerns?
Yeah, I that would, and we talked about that at our last meeting, and really that was the direction that was given, to come back with those, and we have had some there was some staff discussions about it, and we did see some things presented. So I think that would be helpful. I mean, like I said, easing into this would be better than jumping right into it. And if we could take it out of being a line item and move it into a contingency fund, if we wanted to approve it right now, that may be something we could do, or look at other alternatives for how it's presented. And clarify exactly, what those parameters are, like you mentioned, Kate. I think that's to have some control and understanding of how this fund will be used, because right now it just seems like it's just an open ticket that I think is really underestimated, especially for somebody to get up and running to really provide significant input from a legal perspective. That $20,000 is not going to cover that. So I struggle with the whole process of what we're doing here. We're with putting it as a line item on our budget, we're setting that precedence. I would rather come back with a well-defined RFP and understand what those needs are, and know that, and be realistic. This is more of a $50,000 to $75,000 budget item than a $20,000. But like I said, when I was mentioning about putting it into Dan's contract, I think that there are some things that Dan has to, he needs some legal advice on how to respond to things. Maybe, we could put a line item in his contract to not exceed the $20,000, and then give him approval to use up to $5,000 at his discretion at a time. If the amount is more than that, that he would come before the board and explain his expense to us. But either one of those options I could see working for this first year. And as this evolves, I definitely see us growing into a legal line item budget. That is going to happen. Right now, it's just it's a big step that I don't think we presented it in the right way to get that clarity. And ultimately for Golden State to fund that, I got to understand it.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying, Mark. Again, I'm going to go back to one of the reasons that I was one of the people that brought this up. Those of us that have been on the committee since the beginning, there have been points in time where we've had disputes between the various parties' attorneys because there's been conflict of interest. So if the county, doesn't want to get, and I'm just picking somebody, but if the county doesn't want to have to pay more funds or whatever, then their counsel would advise one way. And then if somebody else wanted them to pay more funds, their counsel would advise another way. So I think what you talked about, and I'm sorry to disagree with you, Kate, but I think what you talked about, Mark, of basically including it as part of the executive director's contract, and then, the scope of work that he provides, and then putting it in as a contingency for legal services as determined necessary by the executive director up to $5,000, and anything in excess of that would come to the board. I still believe is the best way to go, because I really do think we need to go down this path, especially if someday in the future we're going to have a JPA. At that point, we have to have independent counsel.
Sure, right. Yeah, I agree, Marshall.
So anyway, that's how I'd like to see that happen. So when we get to motion stage, I'm going to propose an amendment to move that over in conjunction with what Mark and I have just been saying.
Marshall, would your proposal be to move that entire dollar amount
Yes.
into Dan's contract? Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is Charlie at S&T, and I want to I sympathize with Mark, what you're talking about, and I understand your concerns. And also just want to say that I very much, S&T and probably everybody else very much appreciates the fact that Golden State Water has, for instance, two attorneys attending this meeting now, and typically one or two attorneys attending each of the staff meetings, as well as these meetings. And the county has always had at least one attorney attending the Basin Management Committee meetings like this, and also the staff meetings. That represents considerable effort by the county and Golden State Water, and I've always appreciated it. And those legal counsels representing Golden State Water and the county, my goodness, very valuable. And however, they have expressed at times concerns that they actually aren't working for the Basin Management Committee, that they're working for one of the 4-member entities, and that they're in a difficult position oftentimes. And I just wanted to add that. So I'm interested in Marshall's proposal that he'll be putting forward during the motion. If we're done with that, I'd like to move. Could I make a comment now about the lower aquifer nitrate investigation, or would you prefer to make more comments about this legal representation issue?
I think we pretty much beat that to death. Let's go ahead and move on to the nitrates.
Okay. The lower aquifer nitrate investigation, I'm very happy that this showed up in the budget. There's some things here that I'm surprised about, that S&T is mentioned in this, and the well LA8 is mentioned as the only well in the program. First of all, I just want to clear up one issue about confusion. S&T Mutual Water Company, the S&T does not stand for Sunset Terrace, interestingly enough. That it was incorporated as S&T Mutual Water Company, and for two men, Salzman and Tokes, formed the company, and that's where the S&T comes from. Anyway, another little pedantic exercise. So,
Well, now we've got a little bit more of trivia overload going.
The lower aquifer nitrate investigation is something that is very important for the basin. It should not be, there are three major areas of the basin that are widely distributed in different geographical areas of the basin that are being still polluted by high density septic fields. This paragraph written in this description for the lower aquifer nitrate investigation budget item really only describes one of these three areas. And there may be more. If we did the investigation, we may actually find a fourth one. But the three areas that are of concern are mentioned in reports from the Regional Water Quality Control Board as being problematic for high density production of nitrate. We are seeing the results of this as pollution in lower aquifer production wells, not just the S&T well, LA8, or the Golden State Water well, LA9, which are affected by this situation mentioned in this paragraph. But there are at least two other areas of the basin, geographically located different areas than this, where the county in their LAMP plan that was granted by the Regional Water Quality Control Board, they're no longer allowing the repair of septic systems in these areas, these three areas of the basin. And instead of repairs, homeowners would have to replace their septic system with a nitrate removal system that would store brine water that would have to be hauled off, much like the two commercial or industrial sites like that we have already in the basin that the purveyors have. The $7,000 that's earmarked or proposed for this is approximately the cost of investigating one of these sites. S&T has been conducting an investigation as a private entity without concerning the basin. We aren't using basin resources for the investigation. We've hired Cleve Ferris group to do this privately, and we're paying them out of our own budget for this. I don't believe that we're looking for reimbursement for the costs we've already incurred. We're almost done with this project, we hope. We're entering phase two investigation, and the Regional Water Quality Control Board is lawyering up. They're getting ready to take this to their board and the public and state a case, finally, that might happen next year. During next year. We hope that it happens as soon as next year. But there's more of these that need to be investigated and dealt with along the basin. It's very important, in our opinion, that the Basin Management Committee address this pollution of the lower aquifer from nitrate. Nitrate pollution in the lower aquifer is much different than the nitrate pollution in the upper aquifer and in the perched aquifers, because that pollution eventually gets rinsed out into the bay across the aquitard. Nitrate that leaks down through the regional aquitard into the lower aquifer is trapped. There's no rinsing that happens there. Once you get nitrate concentrations in the lower aquifer, I'm sorry, but we're screwed when that happens. There's no way to get that out other than pumping it out. So I think it's very important. What I'd like to see is actually this $7,000 that's proposed here, and the paragraph describing this. I'd like to, I propose that we double that to something more like $15,000, and investigate at least the other two geographical areas of the basin as basin management committee projects, which S&T would participate in, even though they may not be affecting our groundwater that we're using, that would be affecting the basin groundwater in other areas of geographical basin. So I'd like to propose that we change the text of that proposal to be more generalized as investigating and remediating the source of nitrate pollution impacting the lower aquifer water supply, period, without mentioning the S&T well, and boost that up to $14,000 as a beginning to go through phase 1 investigations of very important deterioration of our lower aquifer supplies. Sorry, I was so wordy there.
That's okay. Thank you. Okay, do we have more discussion or comments on Charlie's statements?
I guess I would have a clarifying question for Charlie. I think what's included in the Cleese-Harris proposal is some considered potentially a phase 2 of the investigation that was completed in the S&T mutual area wells. Are you saying, Charlie, that S&T is going to fund that phase 2 by itself? And so that's going to move forward regardless of whether or not this is approved?
Well, that's interesting. It may not be clever for me to answer that question in public.
Okay. All right. Well,
let me do it. Yes. Yes. The next phase of this investigation is the proposal only costs $600 for the next in part of the investigation. Now that's just what we would be paying Cleese-Harris for that next investigation. This is, of course, private work. This is similar to the new program C well that the Community Services District is working on. We don't get into a lot of the private details during these meetings because that's a private project being run by the CSD, just like this, unfortunately, has been a private project just being operated by S&T Mutual Water Company. But we can be right up front about it. We're getting close to what I hope is closure, answering the follow-up questions posed by the Regional Water Quality Control Board. And I'm hopeful that we're getting very close to satisfying all of their concerns, and that they will be soon, perhaps as soon as this coming year, agendize this for their board, their consideration of their board, to begin a remediation, a cure for the pollution. And I would hope that we can do this also in at least the other 2 geographical areas of the base.
Okay, thank you. Well, what are we going to do here? Any more comments, questions?
No, no comments from me, Marshall. I think I've made up mine.
Well, I'm ready to make a motion myself, which is to accept this with that change to the legal services contingency, to move that to the executive director's contingency with the $5,000 spending limit, and with being reported in the executive director's report every month that we have a meeting.
Marshall, would you consider also with your proposal to change the wording of the nitrate investigation description and increase that to $15,000 to investigate all of the areas of the basin that are being polluted, the lower aquifer that are being polluted?
I need to have an answer from Daniel if he believes that extra money is available.
Yeah, I guess I think we probably need some more time with the staff to understand what Director Cody is proposing here, and whether or not there would be budget available to increase the budget associated with that task. I guess I can say at a staff level, we developed this proposed budget targeting kind of a similar range to previous BMC year budgets. And so, yeah, I would need to check in with the individual parties to see if they would be able to accommodate an increase beyond that.
And we could use contingency funding if necessary.
Yeah, I agree. We just need to have some more information before we're able to approve something like that.
Okay, I think we could perhaps then just, Marshall, we could use your proposal and go forward with the idea that this $7,000 would actually not be likely to be spent on the S&T project, but would be spent to begin similar projects in other geographical areas of the base.
Yeah, I have no problem with that.
Before we move on to a second, Marshall, can I just ask some clarifying questions and maybe
Yes,
help
sure.
Dan with your motion? I guess, so how this would work administratively is just Dan would report in his executive director's report his spending on legal counsel.
Correct.
Okay, and one addition I was thinking we might make is for Dan's budget, for him to list those activities he presented in his PowerPoint as those activities that he would require outside legal counsel to consult on. How does that work?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we bring those back up again, just so we can take a look at those? Just because I guess we should ask Dan if that's all inclusive. Is there any other needs? I'd hate to restrict him to something and not meet his needs. So I don't know if we could, on the presentation, Laura, if you could bring that back to.
I'm sorry, which item did you want?
Legal.
Right, I think that's the page, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm specifically concerned, we have the funding study going on right now. That seems like an item that this outside counsel would weigh in on. So just to give Dan more direction on when to use outside legal counsel.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, having flexibility would be beneficial. So not strictly limiting it to these tasks, because as we don't necessarily know what are the specific legal counsel questions that come up are. But I mean, I think, yeah, authorizing the executive director to access legal counsel when dedicated legal counsel is necessary, and then providing a general description of those services in the I think invoice register, maybe in an appropriate place for that could work. And
there'd be the $5,000 limit too.
yes, yeah, and there would be a $5,000 limit on unauthorized, and then anything beyond that, I think if there was some more significant legal input provided and their time to do that, anything above 5,000, the executive director could bring that to the BMC for formal approval before initiating those additional services.
Correct.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and if the need arises, and if we could have a special meeting and increase that limit fairly quickly. So hopefully that doesn't happen under legal condition, because usually that's not good. But we could have a special meeting to authorize additional funding above that 5,000 if needed, Dan.
Yes, or executive sessions per the Brown Act, where we're discussing potential litigation.
Correct. Okay, is somebody going to second my motion?
Marshall, your motion included moving the entire budget amount, correct? Of the
Yes.
20,000?
Yes.
Then I will second that motion.
Do we have further discussion? Okay, I guess Dan, take a call, roll call.
Roll call. Director Cody,
Yes.
Director Ballantyne,
Yes.
Director Zimmer,
Yes.
Chair Ohilsky.
Yes.
All right, motion passes 4-0.
Okay. Thank you guys very, very much. Oh, excuse me. So does anybody have anything else they want to bring up before we adjourn for future items that we may want to look at other than all the items we've already identified? Nope. Okay, well, then we'll be adjourned. Our next.
Sorry, Marshall, I hate to do this. That just a point of clarification, the motion included approval of the consultant contracts, but potentially with the exception of the lower aquifer nitrate investigation contract.
Correct.
That one staff will discuss and evaluate and bring back a potential modified contract for BMC approval at a future date. But the other contracts incorporated in the staff report were approved as part of the motion.
Right, and we'd like to bring that back as soon as you can so we can see if that 15,000 is a viable number. If not, we'll have to just move forward with the 7.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, appreciate the clarification.
Okay, so that will be our last adjournment of this year. So happy holidays to everybody. Does anybody else have a closing comment, or should we just adjourn?
Happy New Year, everybody.
Yeah, see you in 2022.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, I remember when we moved from 1999 to 2000 and everybody thought that was weird. So, okay, all right, we'll be adjourned then until our meeting in January.
All right, sounds good.
All right, thank you.